On a forgotten world at the edge of space, one man gave up on humanity until a knock at his door forced him to remember what it means to be human. It wasn't a soldier. It wasn't an enemy. It was a woman and 2 freezing children. "What?" she said next, shattered everything he thought he left behind. "My children need a father. I need you." Elric Ward didn't move at first. The wind outside howled like it was alive, snow slicing through the night like sharp teeth. The blizzard roared around his small cabin on Veltuan-5, far from any colony, far from war, far from people. That was how he wanted it. Alone, quiet, safe. He hadn't spoken to anyone in months, maybe longer. The silence didn't bother him anymore. It was better than voices he could never forget. Voices of dying men, screaming commands, desperate cries. Out here, the silence didn't scream back. But that knock, it wasn't part of the storm. It was small, careful, real. Another knock came, followed by a soft thump, like someone, or something, had leaned against the door and couldn't hold on any longer. Elric stood slowly, his knees stiff from sitting too long by the burner. He grabbed the revolver off the wall, pulled on his thermal coat, and approached the door. He hadn't seen another soul in over a year. Anyone out here could only mean one thing: trouble. He opened the door just enough to look outside. Snow blasted into the room immediately, biting cold slicing through his coat. But he didn't notice that. He was staring. There were 3 figures in the storm. A tall, thin woman with pale blue skin, white hair stuck to her face, and golden eyes that didn't flinch from the cold. She stood shivering but still upright. At her legs, 2 children clung to her, small, silent, and clearly freezing. One of them, a boy, was trying to shield the smaller girl with his arms, though his own hands were purple from the cold. Elric didn't say anything. His brain hadn't caught up yet. Then the woman spoke. "I will warm your bed, human," she said in a tired, quiet voice. "My children need a father." There was no seduction in her tone, no promise, just exhaustion. The boy lifted his head, his lips cracked and blue. "We haven't eaten for 2 suns," he said in halting words, his voice shaking. "Mama said someone kind would help." The girl didn't cry. She didn't speak with fear. She just looked at Elric, eyes too large for her face, and asked, "Do you have soup, mister? Mama said warmth comes from kind people." That was the moment something broke inside him. He didn't feel like a soldier anymore. He felt like a man standing in front of something he didn't know how to fight. He lowered the revolver. He stepped aside. "Get in. Now." The woman hesitated, only for a second. Then she pushed the children forward. They stumbled inside, falling near the heat core. She followed, closing the door behind her without saying another word. The storm was shut out again, but the silence that followed was heavier than anything Elric had felt in years. He watched, the children curled together by the heater. The boy held his sister tightly, shielding her even now. The girl leaned into the warmth and closed her eyes. The woman stayed on her knees beside them. Her clothes were torn, barely enough to survive the cold. Her hands were raw, bruised. There were scars on her wrists. Elric moved to the cupboard and pulled out what was left of the stew he'd made days ago. He heated it without a word and handed it to them, one bowl at a time. The woman took hers last. She held it like it was something holy, breathed in the steam, and took a small sip. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. The boy ate carefully, chewing every bite like it was his last. The girl ate too fast and choked. Elric moved without thinking, kneeling beside her with a cup of water. "She's okay," he said gently. "Just slow down." The woman helped, her hands still shaking. She whispered, "Thank you," without meeting his eyes. The girl, Teva, looked up at him again. "You have a crack on your face," she said, pointing to the scar on his cheek. "Did someone break you?" He let out a short laugh. "Yeah, A long time ago. She nodded. Mama has cracks too, but hers are on the inside. That hit harder than anything he'd felt since the war. He sat down in his old chair and watched them. For a long time, no one said anything. The children eventually fell asleep, near the heater. The woman, still silent, prepared to sleep in the corner, far from the bed. "You don't have to do that," Elric said softly. "You didn't accept my offer," she whispered back. "I didn't need it," he replied. "I saw the girl's feet." She didn't argue, but she said something that stayed with him. Others needed more than feet to open their doors. He didn't know what to say, so instead he walked over and extended a hand, not to touch her, just to offer. "The bed's warm," he said. "That's not an invitation, it's survival." She looked at his hand for a moment, then she stood. That night she lay beside him, stiff, silent, facing away. But she didn't flinch. And when she whispered, "Thank you for the heat, for the food," Elric didn't feel like a ghost anymore. For the first time in years, the silence in the cabin wasn't empty. It was full. 3 more heartbeats against the cold. And somehow, he didn't mind the noise. Morning didn't arrive on Veltuan 5 the way it did on other worlds. There was no sun to pierce the frost. Just a shift in the gray, a dull, pale glow through snow-packed windows. The storm had buried the cabin like a forgotten memory. Outside there was no path, no sky, no proof the universe even existed beyond these walls. But inside, there was warmth. Elric stood at the stove, stirring leftover stew, watching the woman and her children as if afraid they might vanish when he blinked. They were still asleep, bundled together under mismatched blankets. The boy, Cello, had one arm flung protectively over his sister's back. The girl, Teva, slept curled into his chest like a kitten, one small hand clutching a corner of Elric's coat. Their mother, Mazari, as he would soon learn, lay on the far side of his bed, motionless. Not dead, just not resting. Not really. Her eyes were closed, but her fingers twitched every few minutes as if ready to flee at the sound of danger. She hadn't trusted the warmth yet. Elric didn't blame her. He moved quietly through the cabin, not because he was afraid to wake them, but because something inside him said they needed the sleep more than he needed the silence. He found himself hesitating at every sound, every breath that wasn't his. Not with fear, with unfamiliar care. The kind he thought he'd buried long ago. When Mazari did stir, it was slow. She sat up stiffly, golden eyes opening halfway. She didn't speak, didn't flinch, just looked at him. He nodded once. She nodded back. Nothing more was needed. "You should eat," he said after a moment, pointing to the pot on the stove. She hesitated, as if unsure whether the offer was real. Then she stood and moved across the room. Not close to him. Just closer. She sat at the table, keeping her eyes down as he handed her a bowl. She cradled it with both hands like it might disappear if she held it wrong. After a few sips, her voice came, so soft, the wind outside almost swallowed it. "My name is Mazari." "Elric," he replied simply. "I know," she said, surprising him. He raised an eyebrow. "I read the old logs before the evacuation. Your name was in the outpost files. Elric Ward, human, ex-military, dangerous, caution advised. That was years ago. You're still here." He didn't ask how she found this place. The answer was already in her eyes. "You're running." She shook her head, her voice quiet. "No, I'm hiding." It was a strange distinction, but he understood it more than he wanted to admit. He sat down across from her, watching as she brought the bowl to her lips again. Her hand still trembled. Exhaustion or fear? Maybe both. "What happened?" he asked. Not harsh, not curious, just tired. She didn't look up. "My mate died. During the war. We were bonded. That means more to us than marriage. It's like losing a piece of your mind, your soul." She paused. "After that, I tried to raise them alone. But alone, women aren't protected in some provinces, especially not ones with children. She didn't have to say more. Elric had seen enough in his time to guess the rest. She continued anyway. They called me incomplete, damaged, said my children would be better off if I disappeared. So we did. There was no bitterness in her voice, no plea for pity, just the dull weight of someone who had stopped expecting kindness from the world. That night, she whispered, when I said what I said at the door, I didn't mean it like an offer, not really, I've just said it before. And it worked. Sometimes, the only way I've been let through a door is by pretending I came to warm a bed. Elric didn't speak. Not for a while. Then he stood, poured her a second bowl. You don't have to pretend here, he said quietly. She looked up. And for the first time, he saw something different in her eyes. Not hope, not trust, but the possibility of them. Later that morning, Teva woke. She wandered to the stove barefoot, dragging a doll made from an old sock. She looked up at Elric with sleepy eyes. Is it soup day again? Looks like it. Good, she said. Your heater smells like safety. Elric blinked, then laughed softly. He hadn't laughed in years. Cello joined soon after. He sat at the table stiffly, not speaking at first, just watching, measuring every word, every move. A soldier's child, Elric thought. Not in training, but in trauma. Careful, guarded. They ate together in silence, the kind that didn't hurt. Mazzari helped clean. Her hands moved slowly, but they no longer trembled. Not as much. That night, when the children were asleep, Elric brought out a thick blanket and handed it to her. You can take the bed. She looked at him. You don't have to do that. I know. She didn't say thank you, but she laid down in the bed and didn't face the wall this time. He took the chair again, staring at the fire. Then softly she spoke. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. The wind outside had died down. The snow still covered the windows, but inside the cabin there was a flicker of something warmer than heat. It wasn't trust yet, not peace, but it was real. And for Elric Ward, that was enough to stay awake for. Elric stayed in the chair, long after the others had fallen asleep. The fire cracked softly, its light dancing across the stone walls like old ghosts trying to whisper secrets. He didn't listen to the ghosts. Not tonight. His eyes drifted again toward the bed. Mazzari slept with her arms wrapped around her children, her white hair spread over the pillow like snow caught in moonlight. Teva was curled into her mother's chest, her bandaged arm resting atop Mazzari's ribs. Cello faced outward, his eyes closed but not relaxed. Even in sleep, the boy stood guard. Elric leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at the photo on the wall. 4 people, all in uniform. Himself, younger, smiling, before the scar, before everything broke. The others were gone now, names carved into cold metal, lost under collapsed bunkers or scattered across star fields no one would ever visit again. He had buried war, duty, and even hope out here in this wasteland. But tonight, there were 3 breathing reminders in his cabin that maybe not everything deserved to stay buried. He stood slowly, bones popping with quiet protests. He didn't wake anyone. Just placed a log into the fire and returned to the chair, keeping his distance like a habit he hadn't yet learned to break. The next morning, something changed. It was small. Mazzari made tea. He came into the room expecting silence, but found her crouched by the stove, spoon in one hand, the other gently nudging Teva's fingers away from the flame. The girl giggled when scolded, hugging her sock doll tight like it had secrets to keep. Didn't think you'd know how to work that, Elric muttered, nodding at the burner. She didn't turn, just said, There's tea, if you want it. He poured a cup. It tasted like leaves, boiled too long, but it was warm. He drank the whole thing. Later, Cello approached him. Awkward, almost rigid. I can help, the boy said, standing straight like he was addressing a commanding officer. Help with what? Chopping wood, fixing things, carrying. I don't like doing nothing. Elric looked him over. Still too thin. Toes, still wrapped in cloth, though the frostbite had faded to a safer pink. You're not ready for heavy work. I can still be useful. That word, useful. Elric remembered saying it once, about a young soldier with shaking hands and a broken aim. That boy had died trying to be useful, trying to prove something. You don't need to earn your place, Elric said, not unkindly. Cello didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. The day passed slowly. Veltuan 5 had no proper sun, only a sky that shifted from one shade of gray to another. Still, the storm had lessened. Snow still drifted, but the wind had lost its teeth. They used the time. Cello sat at the table carving a piece of wood with a dull tool Elric had given him. Teva drew on ration cloth with bits of coal, proudly presenting her masterpieces to whoever would look. This one's you, she said to Elric, holding up a stick figure with a crooked scar. Am I that tall? No, but I wanted you to look big, like a bridge. He tilted his head. A bridge? So you can hold me and Cello at the same time, she said simply. That one got him. He didn't say anything, but he kept the drawing, folded it carefully, tucked it in the old photo frame beside the others. That evening, as he patched a cracked solar wire, Mazzari stood near the door, watching him. You don't ask many questions, she said. You don't offer many answers. I thought you might want to know why we really came. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. She nodded once. Then she said, I came here because this was the last place anyone would follow. Because they don't think a broken woman and 2 half-blood children deserve to be found. Elric didn't flinch. He just wiped his hands on a cloth. They were wrong, he said. She blinked, looked away. Most people don't say that. I'm not most people. A pause. The cabin creaked softly as the cold settled in for the night. You're a quiet man, she said, and you're not used to kindness. She almost smiled. Later, after the children had fallen asleep, Teva murmuring nonsense in dreams, Cello whispering promises to a wooden carving, Elric stood by the fire, Mazzari beside him. You built this place alone? She asked. Yeah. It's strong. It was meant to keep things out. Is it still? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, You're safe here. She didn't say thank you. She stepped a little closer. Close enough that their arms touched, lightly, like brushstrokes across canvas. She didn't flinch. Neither did he. They stood like that for a long time, just watching the flames. That night, Mazzari lay in the bed again, not on the edge, not stiff with distance, closer. And when she whispered, You're not what I expected, he whispered back. Neither are you. He didn't sleep in the chair this time. He lay beside her, both of them facing the same direction, not touching, but not alone, not anymore. It still filled the room, still hung heavy in the corners and soaked into the stone walls. But it no longer felt empty. It was the kind of silence that lived between steady breaths, between 2 people lying close enough to hear the other's heart, but far enough to pretend they didn't notice. Elric had barely moved all night. Mazzari hadn't either. They didn't speak, didn't reach for each other. But the space between them didn't grow. It stayed steady, like a thread tied between 2 anchors in the storm. Outside, the wind had quieted to a whisper. Veltuan 5 wasn't merciful, but it had moods, and this was its rare calm. Morning came in silver light, filtering through the snow-packed windows, outlining the sleeping children in soft glow. Teva snored like a kitten. Cello lay half-twisted in the blankets, a wooden carving clutched in one hand. Elric's old coat was tucked around them both like a promise. Mazzari was already awake when Elric opened his eyes. She didn't move at first, just watched him quietly, her hair falling across her cheek like strands of snow. "I thought you were asleep," he said. "I was pretending." "So was I." She gave him a small look. Wry, tired, amused. It said more than words could. They rose without ceremony, stepping carefully around the sleeping children. Elric made tea. Mazzari helped, silently passing him the last spoonful of dried leaves like it was treasure. "You don't ration this for yourself?" he asked. "I don't drink it for me," she replied. "I drink it for calm." She took a sip, eyes closed for just a second. Then she opened them and whispered, "You do that too." He blinked. "Do what?" "Drink things for reasons that have nothing to do with taste." He chuckled, low and rough. "You're observant." She shrugged. "I had to be." Before Elric could respond, a thump echoed from the sleeping area. Then a sharp yelp. Teva. He was moving before the second sound hit. Mazzari was already there, her body a blur of mother's instinct. Teva sat on the floor, cradling her splinted arm, face pale and breath shaky. "I rolled wrong," she whispered, trying not to cry. Elric crouched beside her, checking the bindings gently. "You didn't damage it, it's just sore." Mazzari reached for her daughter, pulling her close. "You scared me." Teva nodded into her mother's chest, still sniffing. "I didn't mean to." "I know, sweet one." Elric stood, quietly grabbed a warm cloth and passed it to Mazzari. She took it with a grateful glance, dabbing her daughter's face. Cello stirred next. When he saw the scene, he bolted upright. "What happened?" "She's fine," Elric said before Mazzari could answer. But the boy didn't relax. His shoulders remained tight, his fists clenched. It was more than protection. It was fear. The kind that came from too many nights not knowing what would happen if one of them got hurt. Elric knelt again, met the boy's eyes. "She's safe. I'll always make sure of it. And of you." Cello didn't reply, but something in his chest eased. His eyes dropped to his sister, who gave him a thumbs up with her uninjured hand. Breakfast was quiet, but warmer than usual. Mazzari made thin stew, stretching dried roots with a handful of herbs Elric had nearly forgotten he had. Teva ate slowly, cautious, but smiling. Cello carved while he chewed. At one point, Mazzari reached for a cracked bowl. Elric stopped her. "Use this one instead." She looked at the cleaner bowl in his hands, then at him. "You saved that for guests?" "I didn't think I'd have any." She took it and smiled, just a little. After breakfast, Teva drew again, this time on the back of a food packet wrapper. She called Elric over and pointed to a new picture. 3 figures again. But this time, the tall one in the middle had a second line, one down the cheek, and one across the heart. "What's this?" he asked, tapping the second line. "It means you're healing now." He stared at her, then at the drawing, then tucked it into his coat pocket without a word. The wind picked up again outside, soft but steady. The storm wasn't over. It was just resting. Mazzari spent part of the afternoon reorganizing Elric's supply shelf, not because she was told to, but because it gave her something to hold on to. Elric worked on patching the solar rig, grumbling every time the tools jammed, cursing under his breath when a panel refused to align. Cello followed him out for a few minutes, limping slightly. He didn't ask questions. Just stood nearby, watching, learning. "You always fix things alone?" the boy asked suddenly. "Until recently," Elric muttered. Cello picked up a bolt and held it out. "You missed one." Elric took it with a nod. Inside, Mazzari watched. From the doorway, arms crossed. Her face was unreadable, but her fingers no longer trembled. That evening, they ate together again. More stew, fewer words. And then, when the fire burned low and the room darkened to amber, Mazzari looked at Elric across the flames and said, "I'm still afraid." He didn't pretend to be surprised. "Of me?" he asked gently. "Of staying," she whispered. "Of wanting to?" He nodded slowly. "I'm afraid too," he said. "But I want you here." She looked away, breath catching in her throat. Teva slept nearby, curled against Cello. The children were already home. It was the parents who didn't know how to be that yet. Elric reached for the kettle, poured warm water into a chipped mug, and passed it to her, not as an answer. As a hand offered in silence, she took it with both hands. And for the first time since she'd knocked on that door, Mazari closed her eyes, not from fear, but from something close to peace. Outside, the storm gathered strength again, but inside, the cabin, the silence between heartbeats was filled with something new, something neither of them had felt in years. Safety. Tomorrow, they'd deal with the rest. But tonight, there was warmth. And in a world of cold stars and broken pasts, that was more than either of them had ever expected to find again. The storm outside grew teeth again. By morning, snow had piled against the door like a warning. Wind screamed through the cracks like it wanted back in. The heater struggled but held. Inside the cabin, it was still warm, but now that warmth was thinner, more fragile. Something was building. Elric felt it in the way Mazari moved, carefully, like her steps might crack the ground. She didn't avoid him. She didn't pull away when their hands brushed while passing a bowl or handing over kindling. But she also didn't settle. She still acted like this might not last. Teva didn't notice. She was too busy painting smooth stones with melted wax and charcoal, humming tunes no one recognized. Cello noticed, though, he always did. He watched everything, especially his mother. That morning, while the children played, Mazari knelt near the heater, folding spare linen into neat stacks. Elric had just finished patching a crack in the wall and was setting down his tools when she spoke. Soft, like she didn't mean to. Say it out loud. "You want to know what we ran from?" He paused. "I figured you'd tell me if it mattered." "It matters," she said, her voice not louder, but heavier. "I just didn't know if you'd still open the door after hearing it." He didn't sit, just leaned against the wall, let her talk, let it come the way she needed it to. Mazari didn't look at him. She stared at the folded cloth like it had answers. "In my world, bonded mates are sacred. Not just love, it's deeper, a spiritual thing. When my mate died, they didn't just see me as grieving. They saw me as broken." Her voice cracked just once, but she didn't stop. "My people don't believe a broken vessel can hold balance. They believe children raised by the unbonded are at risk, not because of harm, because of bad fate. So they offered solutions, repairings, marriages. But they weren't about healing. They were about control." She touched a scar on her wrist without realizing it. The first one offered protection. The second didn't ask. The third said my children were better off forgetting I existed. So I ran. Elric didn't speak. Mazari finally looked up, and this time her golden eyes were full of something that wasn't fear, just exhaustion. "I didn't come here to be saved. I didn't want saving. I came here because the file said a man lived out here, human, ex-military, isolated. I thought, maybe you'd understand what it's like to live where no one else wants to." A long silence stretched between them. The heater popped softly in the background. Then Elric said, "I do." Mazari swallowed hard. "I didn't mean what I said at the door. Not really. I said it because the last time I asked for shelter with nothing to trade, I got left outside." Elric moved toward the fire, sat down across from her. His hands rested loosely on his knees, calloused and still dusted with dried ash. "I didn't let you in because you offered something," he said. "I let you in because your daughter asked me about soup." That broke her a little. She looked down, her mouth trembled, but she nodded. They didn't speak again for a while, not until Cello came over, holding out something in both hands. A carving. 3 figures, one tall, one small with a crooked arm. One standing just a little off to the side, carved thinner and more alert. a family. He handed it to Elric without a word. "I made it for you," the boy said, "in case we ever leave." Elric stared at it, then at the boy. "You don't have to leave," Cello shrugged. "We always leave. Not this time." The boy hesitated, then he nodded. Just once. The way soldiers nod when they're not sure if it's hope or a trap, but they're willing to try. That night, while the kids were asleep, Elric didn't stay in the chair. He lay on the bed beside Mazzari, the same distance as always, but this time when he turned toward her, she didn't turn away. "I had a daughter," he said. Her breath caught, but she didn't interrupt. Her name was Lyra, 6 years old. She liked red moons and drawing stars with her fingers on frost. "I left on a short deployment. 3 weeks, they said. She got sick while I was underground, some rare fever by the time the comms reached me." His voice cracked. "I missed her by 6 hours. Mazzari didn't speak. She reached out, slow and careful, and placed her hand on his arm. Not to comfort, just to let him know he wasn't alone. "I used to dream she'd forgive me," he whispered, "that I'd come back and still be her dad." He turned his head. Mazzari was already watching him. Her eyes were full of quiet strength. "She would have," she said, "because you still are." They didn't move closer. They didn't kiss, but that night they fell asleep facing each other. When Elric woke, her fingers were still resting against his, and outside the storm was gone. The snow had stopped, and for the first time in years the cabin wasn't just a place to hide from the cold. It was starting to feel like a place someone could come home to. The next morning, the sky wasn't gray. It wasn't blue either, but it tried. A faint color, barely more than a thought, rippled behind the clouds like a world remembering what light used to look like. Elric noticed it first. He stood near the frost-glazed window with a mug in his hand, staring out into the silence. The snowdrifts were starting to lower. A hint of rock peeked through. A path might reappear if they wanted one. Behind him, small feet padded across the floor. Teva, wrapped in an old blanket, tiptoed toward the heater and touched it gently, with both hands. "Good morning to the warm thing," she whispered as if it were alive. Elric smiled barely. Mazzari stirred next. She moved quietly through the room, her long hair pulled back into a braid that had loosened in the night. She didn't speak when she passed him, only brushed her fingers across his shoulder as she went to check on the children. It was the softest kind of connection, and the most real. Later that day, while the stew simmered and the air inside the cabin smelled faintly of herbs, Mazzari stood near the fire with her arms crossed, her eyes watching Teva draw patterns in the ash on the floor. "Elric," she said without looking at him, "I want to tell you the rest." He looked up from the shelf he was organizing. "I've already heard enough to understand." "No," she said softly. "You've heard enough to care, but not enough to see the wound." He paused, then stepped away from the shelf, wiped his hands on his coat, and gave her his full attention. Mazzari didn't rush. She didn't need to. The silence allowed her space. And for the first time, she filled it. "When my bonded died," she began, "they told me I had 3 moons to grieve. After that, I was expected to remarry, rebond, for balance." Her voice was calm but not detached. It carried weight, the kind that settled in bones, not just skin. But my heart didn't cooperate. I couldn't fake a bond. I couldn't even fake healing. I just wanted to raise my children and be left alone. She moved to the table, her hand resting on its edge like she needed the grounding. They didn't accept that. One man offered food for marriage. Another offered shelter. The third just took. Elric's hands clenched slowly at his sides, but he didn't interrupt. Mazzari's voice grew quieter. "I escaped, with the children. We crossed 3 provinces and hid in storage pods and freight carriers. I stole power cells. I stole food. I begged, I bartered, I lied, and then we ran out of places." She looked up at him, golden eyes unreadable. "And then we found your name." Elric exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "I thought Maybe the kind of man who chose silence was the kind who wouldn't ask for more than survival. You were right, he said. No, I wasn't, she replied gently. Because you've given more than that. And you haven't asked for anything at all. She stepped closer now. Her voice didn't waver. Not this time. But I need you to understand what that first night was. I didn't say what I said because I meant it. I said it because that's the only thing that ever worked, and I hated myself for it before I ever opened my mouth. Elric looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped forward. Not to touch her, just to be near enough that his voice would land softly. I didn't take you in because of what you said. I know. I took you in, he said, because your daughter asked me for soup. Matsuri's eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. Elric continued. I know what it's like to live after the world takes everything and keeps asking for more. I know what it's like to sleep with your back against the wall and your hand on a weapon. And I know what it's like to look at your hands and wonder if they'll ever be good for anything other than hurting. He finally reached out. Just one hand. Open. I don't want anything from you, he said, but I'll give everything I have if you decide to stay. She didn't take his hand. She stepped into his arms instead. No kiss. No sobbing. Just the quiet collapse of walls that had held too long. He wrapped his arms around her, held her like he wasn't trying to keep her, but keep her safe. That night, Elric lit the last emergency candle, not because they needed it, but because he wanted to see her face clearly while they sat in the dark. Matsuri sat close beside him, her shoulder brushing his. The children slept across the room, Teva snoring softly, Cello's carving knife resting beside his newest figure. 4 stick-like people holding hands. I didn't know I'd ever find peace again, she whispered. You didn't, he said. You made it. She turned her head, resting it on his shoulder. Do you miss her? She asked quietly. My daughter, he said. Every day. She nodded. Does it still hurt? He looked toward the children. Less. When I hear her laugh in Teva's voice, when I see her bravery in Cello's silence, I think she'd like that I'm not alone anymore. Matsuri smiled. It was small, but it was real. The fire burned low. The storm didn't return, and in the silence that followed, 2 people who had once been broken found something stronger than survival. They found each other. The silence didn't last. It never does. Not for long. Veltuan 5 had given them a few days of peace. Days filled with slow breakfasts, laughter around the heater, and the quiet, unfamiliar rhythm of a family learning to exist together. Elric had even started marking days again on the wall with a piece of coal, something he hadn't done since the war. But good things are fragile. The first sign came with static. It happened in the early morning, just after Elric stepped outside to check the solar relay. The wind was low, the frost light, and the snow had finally stopped clinging to the eaves like angry ghosts. But when he passed the outer comms pole, the receiver, dead for years, clicked, just once, then again. A faint burst of static like a breath on the back of the neck. He froze, waited, watched. Nothing. But the third time it crackled, Elric stepped back inside the cabin with a look Matsuri hadn't seen before. Not fear, not anger, but something far more dangerous. Alertness. What is it? She asked, setting down a tin of dried greens. Old relay came online. Matsuri stiffened. That's impossible. Yeah, Elric muttered, which is why I'm worried. The cabin fell into a hush. Even the children sensed it. Cello looked up from his carvings. Teva's humming quieted. Elric opened the gear locker, pulled out an old receiver and dusted it off. He plugged it into the panel, fingers moving with practiced calm. The device blinked to life, dim and flickering. Lines of alien script scrolled across the screen. He stared for a long time. What does it say? Matsuri asked. Just coordinates, he replied, voice low. A ship's descent log. She stepped closer. Is it nearby? About 4 kilometers south, he said. Landed 12 minutes ago. Her face went pale. Did they ping the outpost registry? No, she didn't. Speak. She didn't need to. Elric saw it in her eyes. The past had found them. He turned off the receiver, packed it away. Then he stepped into the center of the room and looked at her, at the children. This isn't an evacuation. I know, she said. Could it be them? Mazzari nodded slowly. They don't let property run far. Elric's jaw tightened. You're not property. They don't see it that way, she replied. But I don't care how they see it, we're not going back. Cello stood now too. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. His hand went straight to the small knife at his belt. His shoulders were stiff, but his chin was up. I'll help, he said. You'll stay inside, Elric said firmly. All of you, Mazzari stepped forward. You don't have to protect us. You've already. I want to protect you. Elric cut in. But not because you owe me. Because no one gets to take what they didn't earn. Not again. He moved like a man returning to a part of himself he thought he'd buried. Quick, focused, sharp. Pulled on his coat. Holstered the revolver. Packed a small thermal bag with rations, water, and a flare gun. You're going alone? Mazzari asked. No. I'm going first, he replied. If it's nothing, I'll call back. If it's something, I'll stop it before it sees you. Mazzari stared at him for a moment. Then she took a step closer. She reached up, gently fixed the frayed collar of his coat and said in a low voice, Come back. He gave a short nod, but her next words stopped him in his tracks. Because if you don't, I'll come looking. He blinked, then laughed. Soft, surprised. Now that's a problem I don't want to have. She didn't smile. Don't joke, she whispered. Not with this. He touched her wrist just for a moment, I promise. Then he stepped into the cold, the door shutting behind him like the click of a trigger. Back inside, the cabin felt smaller. Mazzari moved quickly, silently. She rewrapped the children's feet, packed emergency food, and laid out spare thermal suits. Just in case. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. Cello moved beside her without question, helping prepare. Teva just clung to her doll and whispered, Papa will come back. Mazzari wished she had her daughter's certainty. Elric moved fast through the white, eyes sharp, revolver tight in his grip. The snow gave little cover, but he knew the terrain. He reached the descent site in under an hour. The ship was small, sleek, no markings. He crouched behind a ridge and watched. 2 figures stepped out. Not soldiers, not even properly dressed for cold. They were bounty men, private, armed, the kind that hunt things, not because of duty, but for reward. Elric's stomach turned. One of them lit a beacon. The signal was old code, standard for returning fugitives. To their handlers. No questions. No trial. He clicked the safety off the revolver. This wouldn't end with words. Then, he heard it. A sound behind him. A crunch in the snow. He turned fast, gun raised only to freeze. Mazzari stood there. Coat too thin, hair braided tight. Cello beside her, jaw clenched, carving knife in hand. What are you doing here? Elric hissed. I told you, Mazzari said. If you didn't come back, I'd come looking. You brought him? I didn't bring him. He followed me. Elric looked at the boy. Cello didn't flinch. I'm not leaving again. Elric stared at them both, 2 people who had spent their whole lives running. Standing now, refusing to back down. The figures near the ship hadn't noticed them yet. Elric sighed. Then let's finish this, he said. No one spoke again. They moved as one, quiet, focused. The cold had teeth again, but it bit less now, because none of them were running anymore, and for the first time since the war, Elric Ward was not fighting for survival. He was fighting for something worth surviving for. The air was razor sharp now, not from cold, but from clarity. Elric crouched low behind a snow-covered boulder, scanning the 2 men near the ship. Mazzari and Cello huddled behind him, breath misting in the windless chill. Above them, the sky hung heavy with low clouds like a closed lid. No sun, no mercy. The bounty hunters stood casually near their ship, unaware. Their confidence was the loudest thing about them. One leaned against the hull, chewing something. The other had his coat open, fingers resting on his holster. Not tense, not ready. Arrogant. Elric knew their type. Hired hands. Good at tracking, bad at respecting. One of them turned and set a small metal beacon into the snow. The light flashed red once, then pulsed. A location marker. Automated signal. He'd seen it before. Ping the galactic registry. Trigger. A pickup drone, transport live or dead. Mazari was on that list. Maybe the children too. Elric's grip tightened around his revolver. He leaned toward her. "You sure you want to be here?" "I was hunted in silence," she whispered. "I won't hide in it again." He looked at Cello. The boy's face was pale but focused, jaw locked tight, one hand around his small blade, the other clenched, in a fist. "I can help," he said again. "You already are," Elric told him, voice low but firm. They had no advantage. No weapons beyond the revolver, one blade and grit. No rescue coming, no high ground. But they had resolve. And history had shown Elric something unshakable. Resolve could win wars when guns ran out of bullets. "I'll approach," he said. "Draw them off." "No," Mazari said. "We go together." Elric opened his mouth to argue. But then he saw her face. The same face that had once stood at his door offering herself in desperation, now lit with fire. She wasn't bargaining anymore, she was standing, so he nodded. "Then we move quiet, circle left, let them speak first." They crept over the ridge like ghosts, low, slow, invisible. Elric's body remembered how to stalk. The war had etched that into his bones. Mazari followed without a sound, light on her feet. Cello stayed tight between them, quick, observant. At 20 meters, the wind shifted. The chewer looked up. "What the hell?" Elric stepped out first, revolver raised. "That's close enough," he said. The other man reached for his weapon. Too slow. Elric fired into the snow in front of them. A warning. Thunder cracked through the valley. The bounty men froze. One of them raised his hands, chuckling. "Easy now," he said. "We're not looking for trouble." "Good," Elric replied, "because you just found something worse." They glanced at each other, recognizing him now, not by name but by posture. Military, veteran, dangerous. One tried charm. "We're just here for the blue-skin, friend, that's not your concern. She's under my protection. Then you're making it your concern." Cello stepped into view beside Elric. "She's my mother," he said. The bounty men blinked, confused. They looked at the child. Then at Mazari, who now moved forward slowly, coat fluttering behind her like wings. "She's not yours anymore," Elric said. "She never was." The taller bounty hunter gave a humorless smile. "You can't stop this." Elric's voice turned cold. "I already did." He pulled the trigger. The taller man flinched, expecting death. But the bullet hit the beacon, shattering it into a burst of sparks and smoke. "No signal, no pickup," Elric said. "No return trip." The hunter swore and reached for his weapon, but Mazari moved. In one motion, she stepped in, grabbed the wrist, and twisted. The gun clattered to the snow. Before the man could shout, she drove her knee into his gut, sending him to the ground, gasping. Cello darted forward and held his knife steady, not touching, not trembling, just ready. The other man backed off fast, hands high. All right, we're leaving." Elric stepped closer, revolver steady. "You're not going to say her name again. You're not going to remember her face. You're going to go back to wherever hired cowards crawl and tell them nothing. You understand me?" "Yeah," the man stammered. "Yes, good, now walk." They didn't argue. They didn't look back. They just left, shuffling through snow, pride shattered. Elric didn't lower the gun until the ship lifted and became a speck in the sky. Only then did he exhale and let the quiet return. Mazari turned to him. Her lip was bleeding from where she'd bitten it. Her hands were scraped, but her eyes were bright. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "I did." She stepped closer until they were toe-to-toe. "I didn't come here to be saved," she said, "but you saved me anyway." He smiled faintly. "You walked through a blizzard. I just opened the door." "No," she said. "You opened your heart." Cello stood beside them now, shoulders back, eyes shining not with tears but with pride. They walked home as the snow began to fall again, not hard, but soft, like blessing instead of burden. Part 7. Climax and Resolution. The warmth that stayed. The heater hummed softly. Elric sat near the fire, one arm draped around Mazari's shoulders. Teva lay curled in her mother's lap, murmuring softly in sleep. Cello carved in the corner, working on a new figure, this one with 4 people and a little dog they didn't own yet, but Teva insisted they'd adopt in spring. There was laughter in the room now, quiet, real. The cabin, once just a shelter, now felt like something else, like home. Elric wasn't sure when it had happened, when he went from surviving the silence to welcoming it, when his bed became half-occupied, when a cold chair turned into a shared meal, when a scarred girl with wild hair called him Papa, and it felt right. He looked down at Teva, fast asleep. She had drawn something earlier, again on the heater with charcoal. Another set of figures, this time, one of them had arms stretched wide across the others. "It's you," she had said. "Because you hold us all." Mazari whispered beside him. "You're different now." "So are you." She leaned in, kissed him. There was no fear in it. No bargain, no cost, only warmth, and it stayed. Outside, the world was still frozen, but inside the cabin, spring had already begun, not in flowers, not in sunlight, but in laughter, in names spoken gently, in meals shared without needing to earn them, in the soft thump of small feet running across the floor, in the warmth that didn't come from fire, but from family. And for the first time in a very long time, Elric Ward was no longer alone. He was chosen, and that made all the difference.